So much of healthcare today is about standardized protocols. They're designed to make everything more efficient, more accessible. But what happens when just following the protocol isn't enough? In this explainer, we're going to dive into some source materials that ask some really critical questions about this approach. And we're going to start with a story that shows just how high the stakes can be. To really get to the heart of what these documents are arguing, we have to start not with statistics or policy, but with a person, a young girl whose entire life was changed by what the source calls a preventable tragedy. Wow, that statement right there comes directly from one of the case histories. It's a blunt, powerful summary of a 2-year ordeal. And the story of how a simple complaint about being tired led to such a devastating outcome, well, it pretty much reveals everything about the potential cracks in the system. Okay, so let's walk through what happened here. At 12 years old, she says she's tired. A blood test points to anemia, so the protocol is followed. She gets iron tablets. Simple enough. But for 2 whole years, this treatment keeps going, even though it's not helping. And here's the kicker, the really crucial point according to the source. It's what didn't happen. No one ever performed a hands-on physical examination. It was only when she was 14 in acute pain that she finally got one. And that's the tragedy right there. That huge mass was one of her kidneys. The whole time, this routine treatment for what they thought was anemia was actually hiding something so much worse. It's a problem the documents argue a simple physical exam could have found years earlier. So the outcome wasn't just tragic, it was, in their view, preventable. So you have to ask, right, how did we get to a place where, as these sources describe it, a protocol could be followed blindly for 2 years without a basic physical check? To figure that out, we've got to rewind a bit and look at how the system itself changed over time. Well, the documents we're looking at trace this whole shift back through decades of policy changes. And it wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a gradual move toward what many people saw as a more modern, more efficient way to deliver care. This timeline really lays out the key moments. So you see, the idea started bubbling up back in the 80s. By 1996, one of our sources points out that people were already worried about a tick-the-box mentality, replacing the simple act of listening to a patient's story. But the real game changer, the moment everything shifted, was in 2006. And check this out. This is the actual BBC News report from back in April 2006, marking that exact turning point. It announced that nurses and pharmacists were going to get way more power to prescribe drugs for serious conditions. This one move was absolutely central to making this protocol-based approach a core part of the system. And here you have it, the official line at the time from the health secretary herself. On the surface, the goal sounds great, right? Quicker, easier access to medicine. It was all about efficiency and better service for patients. But, and this is a big but, the sources we're exploring today argue that this very move created a whole new kind of risk. So here's the thing. According to these documents, that story about the 12-year-old girl, it wasn't a one-off. The author actually put together a list of other cases that they believe show a really disturbing pattern of errors, all driven by protocols, and all where a physical exam was missed. Okay, so take this first case. A woman comes in with tummy pain and vomiting. Based on the symptoms, she's treated for gastritis. This happens repeatedly, and guess what? No physical exam was ever done. It took a simple pregnancy test later on to find the real cause. Then there's this one, a 20-year-old guy with a rash. He gets a diagnosis of shingles. But the source says his condition just gets worse and worse until he's rushed to a doctor who diagnoses a staph infection that had led to septicemia. We're talking about a life-threatening blood infection here. Now, this next one it's just deeply concerning. A 12-year-old girl is seen not once, but twice for bloodstains. The protocol points to a urinary infection, so that's what she's treated for. No physical exam was ever performed. And the case notes point out the obvious terrifying risk that signs of potential sexual abuse or traumatic injury were completely missed. And to round out these examples, listen to this. A young woman has high blood pressure. She's labeled with white collar hypertension, which is basically just assuming it's anxiety from being in a clinic. So they send her home, no treatment. And what happens? She later collapses with kidney failure and ends up in the intensive care unit. So what's the big takeaway from all these stories? The sources argue it's not about people not caring. It's about a fundamental clash between two totally different ways of thinking about how to diagnose an illness. It's experience versus the algorithm. Okay, this slide right here breaks down the two competing models of care perfectly. On one side, you have the traditional doctor's diagnosis. The sources describe this as being all about finding the root cause. It's about listening to a patient's unique story, using experience, and doing physical exams to figure out what's really going on. Then you have the protocol-based model. It's focused on the symptoms. It's about following guidelines which the source claims can sometimes put efficiency ahead of a deep, thorough investigation. In this slide, wow, this one really drives home the training gap that the sources keep pointing to. Think about it. On one hand, you've got doctors with 5 or 6 years of medical school, plus another 5 or more years of supervised hospital training. They're steeped in the foundational sciences. And on the other hand, the documents talk about training for some of these new prescribers that might be as short as 6 months, focused just on specific protocols, without that same deep scientific background. And all of this really leads to the ultimate question that these documents are asking. In this big push for a faster, more accessible healthcare system, are we accidentally making it less safe? One of the texts we looked at makes an absolutely shocking claim that medical errors are now the third most common cause of death. That is a huge, stark number, and it's clearly meant to underscore just how massive the problem could be when things go wrong in the diagnostic process. So when you boil it all down, the central argument is this. It's a trade-off, a really fundamental one. On one side, you've got the goals of making healthcare faster, cheaper, and easier to access. And on the other, you've got the kind of safety that the author argues can only come from years of training, hands-on experience, and the wisdom to know when to look beyond the checklist. So, in the end, these documents don't really give us an easy answer. Instead, they leave us with a really tough question. They present a series of powerful and often tragic stories to argue that while protocols can be useful, relying on them too much without that foundation of deep medical training and physical examination can come at a devastating human cost. And it forces all of us to ask, in our search for efficiency, what is the true cost to the patient?
History will not forgive this silence. Infections are no longer curable, only preventable.
Even in our darkest hours, we look to the dawn. And with the help of innovation, we find the strength to heal.